Welcome back to Woo with Proof. I'm your host, Lindsay Smith. And today, you guys, we're going to go into something that I think is probably going to hit a lot of you right in the chest, right? We're going to be talking about the abandonment wound. And before you think to yourself, oh, that's not me, I didn't have some dramatic childhood tragedy, I want you to stay with me because this wound is actually far more common and far more subtle and actually far more quietly devastating than most people actually realize. And it almost certainly has some fingerprints all over your life right now. You just might not realize it. So here's the thing about abandonment wounds and why I personally care so deeply about this topic in the context of my work. It's because you can't manifest from a hiding place. And that's exactly what the abandonment wound has you do. It has you hide. And you can't call in the life that you want while you're still operating from a version of yourself that was built to keep other people in your life comfortable. Also, what it does. And so for many of us, the people pleasing, the performing, the shrinking, the shape shifting, it traces back to this wound, right back into this fear. So today I really want to dive into this, what it looks like, what it is, how it forms, what its actual purpose was, and what the real fear underneath it is. And most importantly, how we can heal this, not just intellectually understanding it, but how to actually move through it. And this is a really important part of the work that I do because it's a place that I have lived in most of my life. The abandonment wound for me started very, very early on. And it really affected my relationships with friends that I had. It also affected my romantic relationships. It affected the jobs that I went for. And most importantly, it affected my relationship with myself, which is something that you guys know I'm deeply passionate about teaching. And I think a lot of my purpose here on this planet is to help people come back to themselves, to love themselves, because it's the most important thing that you will ever learn to do in your life. So before we get into how it forms, I want to kind of paint the picture of what it probably looks like or how it shows up in adult life. Because most people with abandonment wounds don't actually walk around thinking, oh, I have abandonment issues. They think that's just the way they are. So here's a few ways it can show up in your life. Number one, being the person who twists yourself into all different forms and knots to make sure that everyone around you is okay. You're constantly reading the room. You're adjusting yourself. You're either making yourself smaller or bigger depending on what the moment seems to need of you. And you exhaust yourself trying to be whatever you can be to keep people close to you. Number two, it can look like saying yes when you mean no. And you may be generous, but when you say no, or when you say yes, even though you mean no, you're doing it because that no feels dangerous to you. Like it could cost you the relationship with this person. Like you might not be wanted anymore if you actually have any needs or limits yourself. Number three, it looks like this obsessive loop after you send a text and it doesn't get answered right away. It's the spiral when somebody goes quiet on you, the hypervigilance, the always scanning for the shift in their tone, the slight change in their energy, the moment that somebody pulls back even a little bit. This one showed up really big for me in my romantic relationships, especially even early on in my marriage that I'm in now. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But number four, it shows up like pushing people away first and testing people, right? Creating that crisis so you can find out whether or not they're going to leave rather than waiting for the inevitable, right? It's better to control the ending than be surprised by it. Number five, it looks like not knowing who you actually are because you've spent so long being who everybody else needed you to be that the real you, your real wants, opinions, and your actual self got buried somewhere along the way. And number six, it looks like staying in things way past their expiration date. It's, staying in jobs or relationships or keeping friendships because leaving to you feels like proof that you weren't enough to make it work. And that being left feeling, it feels unsurvivable. So you hold on and hold on and hold on. And in the context of my work, it looks like hiding. It looks like hiding the real you. Running a life that looks maybe put together on the outside while inside you're quietly starving for something that maybe you can't even quite name. So how does this happen? How does a person get here? You don't have to have had a dramatic, obvious childhood trauma for an abandoned womb to form. Like I said, some of you probably did. You had a parent who left, a death, a crisis, something like that. But there are many of you that actually came from homes that looked fine from the outside. Maybe they were even loving homes, and somehow this wound formed within you anyway. And one of the most important theories I think out there that connects to this is attachment theory. And what attachment theory has found is basically around human infants and how we're biologically wired. And we're wired at a survival level to form close bonds with our primary caregivers. And it's not like, oh, that'd be nice to have. This is a survival strategy. And infants who lose proximity to their caregivers go to extraordinary lengths to try to restore it, crying, clinging, refusing to be comforted. This is their evolution, because a human infant who can't maintain closeness to a caregiver will die. So that need for attachment is literally a life or death drive that's encoded in our bodies. And what this means is that when connection feels threatened to you, and that looks like when a caregiver is inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, physically absent, or simply just not attuned to us, our nervous systems as children register it as a survival threat. And, these attachment relationships are the major environmental factors that shape brain development during its period of maximal growth. So the wound doesn't just live in our memory, it lives in the brain and it lives in the nervous system. It literally becomes the architecture of how a child understands themselves and the world. Now, here's the part that I think is really important to understand. Abandonment doesn't only look like a parent who left you. Emotional abandonment is just as impactful and actually far more common. And what emotional abandonment can look like is, let's say you had a parent who was physically present with you, but emotionally unavailable to you. Like they're there, but they're not really there. They're going through the motions without actually seeing you. It can also look like a parent who has their own unprocessed pain, and that meant that there was no room for yours. So you learned early on, don't be too much, don't need too much, make it easy for them. And it can also look like a parent who was inconsistent. Maybe sometimes they were warm, and then sometimes they were cold towards you. Or sometimes they were very loving, and then sometimes they were really critical. And you never knew which version was coming your way. So you spent your whole childhood trying to figure out how to get that warm version of them to show up. Maybe you were told that your feelings were wrong. You were told to stop crying. You were told you were too sensitive. Don't be so dramatic, right? And when you learn that your emotional experience is inconvenient to the people who love you, you learn to abandon it yourself. Or maybe you even witnessed a lot of conflict growing up. Research actually shows that children who grow up watching their parents in conflict are more likely to develop abandonment fears. Because even if neither parent is physically leaving, the felt sense of instability is enough to put your nervous system on high alert. And this is one of those quiet ways that most abandonment wounds form. They're not always like one big moment, but it's like thousands of little moments where you got the message that the real you wasn't safe to be there. Now, this isn't a mistake. The way this wound is formed, this isn't a mistake. And the behaviors that come out of it, the people pleasing, the hiding, the shape-shifting, the hypervigilance, right? Those are all adaptations. They were your child self doing the most intelligent thing that was available to her, which is figuring out how to stay close to the people that she needed for survival. It makes absolute sense. So if being quiet kept the peace, then you became quiet. If being helpful kept your parent engaged with you, you probably became endlessly helpful. Or if you were funny or charming or low maintenance and you got more of that closeness, then that's who you became. You probably learned to read rooms because your safety depended on it. You learned to make yourself small because taking up space felt risky. You learned to abandon yourself because at some point that felt like the only way to keep everyone else from abandoning you. That child was not broken. She was strategic. She was doing exactly what she needed to do to survive her environment. And now the tragedy isn't that you did those things. The tragedy is that you keep doing those things long after that environment has changed. And those survival strategies get locked in, carried into our adult lives, into adult relationships, into every moment where we try to be seen and still can't quite let ourselves be seen. So before we talk about the healing, let's take a second to have a little compassion for that part of ourselves, right? We were doing our best. We were always trying to do our best. Now, here's where I want to go a layer deeper, because we call it a fear of abandonment, but I actually want to challenge that framing a little bit, because in my experience, the fear of abandonment is actually a container for something even more primal. The real fear isn't just, oh, they're going to leave me. The real fear is that if they leave, it proves something to be true about me. It proves that I'm fundamentally not enough, that I'm not lovable, that I'm not worth somebody staying for. And if that's true, if that's the verdict, then I'm alone in the universe in a way that is unsurvivable. That's the real terror, you guys. It's not about the other person leaving. It's about what they're leaving means about your worth. Now, research on the abandonment wound itself describes the core belief that drives abandonment-related behaviors. It's the deep, often unconscious conviction that significant others will not be able to continue providing emotional support, connection, or protection. The belief that instability and loss are inevitable. And crucially, that it's somehow our fault. And when abandonment wounds go unprocessed, they don't just shape our relationship preferences, they actively interfere with emotional stability and identity coherence, with the person's ability to know and trust themselves. Now, think about what that means. The wound that started as a threat to external connection eventually becomes a severing of internal connection. We don't just fear others leaving. We lose access to ourselves. And research consistently links unprocessed abandonment trauma to people-pleasing, perfectionism, emotional suppression. These are basically strategies that were originally adopted to maintain attachment, but over time, they erode self-connection entirely. In its most devastating form, the abandonment wound doesn't just make you afraid of being left by others. It teaches you to leave yourself first, to abandon your needs, your truth, your authentic self, because that feels safer than risking rejection. And this is why this work matters so deeply to me in the context of manifestation and just in life in general, because we can't manifest from a place of self-abandonment. How do we call in a life that's truly ours if we don't even know who we are? When a you that's choosing and dreaming and setting intentions is a performance or a survival strategy or a shape that you made yourself into to keep people close to you, that's not a coherent signal. And that wound doesn't just hurt your relationships. It obscures your identity. It keeps you in a hiding place. And think about co-creation when you're in hiding, right? The universe can't co-create with you because you're hiding. So healing the abandonment wound is not something you're going to do in a weekend, okay? It's a process. And I'm going to give you both the psychological and the energetic / spiritual layers here, because in my world, those aren't separate things. They work together. The first step is awareness. And the specific awareness I'm pointing to is this. The behaviors that come from an abandonment wound don't feel like fear. They feel like your personality. They feel like who you are. So the practice is starting to notice where you are abandoning yourself. Where are you editing yourself, shrinking yourself, saying yes to things when you mean no, right? And we're not trying to fix it immediately. We just want to see it, because these wounds, they can't heal in the dark. We have to bring them to the light. We have to look at them. And here's something that research has made very clear about the abandonment wound. It's not just stored in your thoughts, it's also stored in your nervous system. So when emotional abandonment experience happen repeatedly in childhood, those feelings get encoded in a part of your brain called the amygdala. We've talked about this in episode 1, but that's where your emotional memory system is. And they don't just stay as memories, they become programs. They become automatic responses that fire the moment that your nervous system detects like a pattern that feels similar to that original threat. So this is why you can know intellectually that your partner just forgot to text you back and isn't actually leaving you, but it still feels like panic because that survival mechanism is activated. And because for a part of your nervous system, this is a threat. And that part is operating from a much older story. And somatic researchers and trauma specialists, they consistently find that healing trauma requires working through the body, not just the mind. So you can't think your way out of a nervous system response. You have to actually come into your body. You have to meet the sensation. You have to create safety, and you have to slowly help your nervous system update its story about what's actually threatening and what is safe. So practically, it looks like this. You notice the body first. When you feel the abandonment spiral coming on, whether it be panic, hypervigilance, that urge you feel to people please, or the pulling away, you want to notice where you feel it in your body before you actually act on it. Maybe it feels like your chest tightening or your stomach dropping or a constriction. For me, it was shaking. My body would literally like physically start to shake and I would get really cold. And this is the signal. This is that old wound that's activating. And so you just want to be able to be with it. You want to stay in your body rather than going into the story. And breath, we've talked about breath. Breath is the nervous system intervention here. When your body's in fear, we really want to return back to what I talked about before, the long exhale. The longer exhale than inhale is like a psychological sigh. So you're taking one normal breath in, maybe you get a little bit of extra at the top, and then you exhale for a long, slow breath. Doing 5 of those in a row will measurably shift your nervous system state. So you're literally pulling yourself out of that threat mode so that you can respond rather than react to something. And then make sure that you're reparenting yourself as a daily practice. And reparenting is basically just the work of becoming the caretaker to yourself that your younger self needed. We're not waiting on someone else to give us consistency or attunement or reassurance. We're giving that to ourselves. And this can look like just keeping promises to yourself, noticing your needs and actually responding to them, speaking to yourself with the tenderness that you would offer to someone else that you love, staying with yourself when it's uncomfortable rather than abandoning yourself to make the discomfort stop. And now here's the spiritual truth that I want to offer about the abandonment wound. At its core, what it is the disconnection from the deepest source of belonging that there is. Because here's the thing, the wound formed when we were dependent on other people for our sense of safety and worth, which makes sense, right? We were children, we had no other choice, but we're not children anymore. So the healing invitation is not just to become more secure in human relationships, even though that matters. It's to find the connection that can never abandon you, to develop a relationship with your own soul, your own inner knowing, the universe itself as a source of belonging. And that doesn't depend on whether someone texts you back or not, right? So in the work that I do, I talk about the hiding place or the fragment, the version of you that learned to make herself small to stay safe. And what I know to be true is that the real her, your actual self, the one underneath all the performing and the people pleasing and all of that, she's basically just waiting for you to come back for her. And that's the integration work that I do with fragmentation. Now, the abandonment wound ultimately asks you to do the one thing it was designed to prevent, to stop outsourcing your worth, to stop making your belonging conditional on other people's responses, to actually claim from the inside what the wound made you believe could only come from the outside. This is a spiritual act, you guys. It's the most profound kind of coming home. And in the work that I do with women and inside of the reclamation process, which is a program that I'm going to be launching here, hopefully mid to late August is what I'm aiming for. But the reclamation process is going to teach you how to do exactly this, come back home to yourself. Now, within this program, 2 of the 5 fragment types that I work with are directly born from this abandonment wound. The first one is the abandoner, right? So she's the one that learned that she had to leave herself before anyone else could leave her. She's the one who edits, silences, and disappears to maintain connection. She thinks that she's being easygoing or selfless, but underneath it, she's actually terrified. And what she's abandoned is the truest version of herself. And then the second fragment is what I call the hider, right? She knows exactly who she is. She can feel her, but she keeps herself locked away because somewhere along the line, she got the message that the real her is too much or not enough or not safe to show to the world. So she performs a version of herself while the real one is kind of just watching from behind the scenes. Now, if you recognize yourself anywhere in this episode, whether it's in the hypervigilance, the people pleasing, the constant self-editing, the hiding, I want you to know that you're not broken. You're fragmented. And the beautiful thing is that fragmentation can be healed. Now, I've actually created something called Find Your Fragment Quiz to help you actually identify which fragment is the most active in your life right now, and then start to find the specific pattern that you're running. If you go back to my Instagram and you comment the word whole, WHOLE, on any of my posts, I'll send it straight to your inbox. Just make sure that you're following me first so that you can receive it. So I want to give you just a quick recap of what we talked about today. We talked about what the abandonment wound looks like in real life, how it forms in the nervous system and the brain, and what its original purpose was, what the real underlying fear is, and most importantly, how to heal it through the body, through reparenting, and through the spiritual work of finding a belonging that lives inside of you rather than depending on who stays in your life, right? You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were a child who needed something that she didn't always get. And you adapted to that brilliantly, resourcefully, and at a great cost to yourself. But you don't have to keep doing that. The real you is still there, still inside, just waiting on you to find her again. So I hope that this episode was helpful for you. I hope it brought some clarity to the abandonment wound. It's a really big one. It shows up for a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and it really holds a lot of people back, which is why I wanted to touch on this subject. I'm sure we'll be diving into that more in later episodes. But again, just to kind of recap how that showed up for me in my life, in my relationship, like even early on in my relationship with my now husband, I would do all of these things. I would push him away to see if he would stay. I would create chaos to see how he would handle it. Whenever he would demonstrate anything that looked even close to him possibly leaving me, I would go into a complete panic attack. I would start shaking. I would get cold. I would get anxious. Then I would try to bargain with him, chase after him. I did all of these things that were just really harmful to my relationship. And learning to heal this wound transformed my entire relationship with him and our relationship together, and the way that I process things and the way that I personally deal with things, because it's so easy to go into a story when things are happening, like that other person is maybe they're pulling away, not because it has anything to do with you, but because they're dealing with their own stuff, right? And we internalize that as, oh my God, something's wrong with me. He's going to leave me. And it can really destroy our relationships. So I hope that you could take away, even if it's just 1 or 2 things from this episode, to help you kind of bring awareness to that and know that in healing it, you're going to truly transform your life. So thank you again for being here, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.